Hi everyone. For today, I was feeling kind of spontaneous, and part because I was on YouTube just kind of looking at my notifications, and something popped up. Iron Maiden, Hallowed Be Thy Name, a classical musician's first listen and reaction. And now that I'm in kind of a liminal state where I just put out volume 1 of my book series. So it's the second volume, volume 0, volume 1. They're both out. And I've been setting up a lot of preliminary work to start working on volume 2, which is about monsters. But in the interim, I do have a bit of free time, and honestly, I just want to take some time to be able to do things other than just jump straight back into editing and proofreading and illustrating for this big project. I still work on it every day, but I don't want to just do it all the time. I want to be able to kind of just stretch my legs for a bit and do things for fun. So I thought, why don't I do a little analysis video? I haven't done one of those in a long time. And usually in the past, I would do that in comments. So like on Andy Carate's Metallica remix and remaster videos. I used to be, before I came out of the closet, I was 2 Cents guy. 2 Cents Girl didn't really catch on for one reason or another. But also I was just busier writing and working on things. So I didn't have as much time to really focus on metal analysis, even though I really like doing it. So when I saw this video pop up in my feed, and I was just kind of listening to it, and she's going over that classic opening to Hallowed Be Thy Name, and I'm in the midst of like writing about this kind of stuff, the kind of things that Iron Maiden would be singing about and commercializing, incidentally, through their music. And I thought, okay, I have all of these ideas bouncing around in my head because my books are still fresh in my mind. I'm working on them every day, writing and illustrating. So the moment I heard that music, one, it took me back to when I was a teenager and I used to listen to this all the time on CD. But also, I thought I want to analyze this and just kind of think about it. And the first thing that popped into my head was, okay, there's various different things going on thematically that I want to talk about. I also just kind of want to listen to the music a little bit. I don't think I've ever really done this per se, where I actually critique a music. No, actually, no. I take that back. I have responded to people who do like remixes and remasters, but not like music that is made by non-fans. So I might listen to someone who does an Iron Maiden remix or remaster, but I don't think I've really taken the chance to listen to Iron Maiden or Metallica or whomever themselves. For various reasons, I've just never got around to it. But I thought, if I'm going to do one Iron Maiden song, it's got to be this one. And I could easily pick a lot of other Iron Maiden. I'm a big fan of their first 5 albums or so, and then they're kind of hit or miss after that. But if you just had to pick one song that sort of defines them and really encapsulates their greatest sort of moment, like where they kind of achieved greatness in the way that people normally think of them. I think Hallowed Be Thy Name is a really good example of that. I always like the Paul Di'Anno albums, so their self-titled debut and Killers. Those are both really good. They have more of a punk flavor, whereas this, it sort of got swept up in the traditional sort of lyricism and aesthetics of heavy metal going into the 1980s when it began to commercialize under Thatcher's England, neoliberalism. You moved away from punk and into commodifying this sense of like damnation and literally satanic panic as something to make by white boys to sell to the British public. Sorry, my cat is meowing at me, so if I want to scare the cat, I shake this zombie beanbag cat like this, like a rattle, and they will walk into the room and leave again promptly when they hear its threatening pebbles. In any event, sorry about that. But the first thing that popped into my head, even before I really sat down and listened to the whole song, but just that initial kind of opening, is this is a song about the feeling of persecution, where someone is being executed by the state, capital punishment, they're being sentenced to death, or rather they've been sentenced to death, and now that sentence is being carried out, and they're being marched to the gallows, and they're reflecting on their past life as the sands of time for them are running low. And you have to keep in mind, the people who wrote this music were white cishet men, and they were white cishet men who wanted to commodify this feeling of a sense of disintegration, a sense of state collapse and decay towards a medieval regression. That's how capitalism functions. They're writing about those sensations within the imperial core as a feeling of inheritance anxiety, of being born within a decaying castle. It's the spirit of the Gothic, the ghost of the counterfeit, the forgery of sovereignty as a lie that nevertheless furthers the process of abjection. So Kristeva and Gerald Hogel, you have that kind of thing working in concert during the 1980s, when this kind of regression towards an imaginary medieval past felt within the present based on historical material factors. The imperial core is capital that has evolved into itself over centuries and looks backwards during state crisis towards this perceived imaginary, where someone is being put to death. Very similar to Black Sabbath or Metallica, where the former would Electric Funeral sing about nuclear war and annihilation, very popular metal topic that a lot of metal bands from that period, during the Cold War would sing about. Metallica would do that as well on Ride the Lightning, the song Fight Fire with Fire, but the title track, Ride the Lightning, was a song that also sung about execution. And imagining it strictly from the point of view of someone who's not normally punished to nearly the same extent by state forces. A white cishet man is the most privileged group of the middle and lower classes, the working class. And they imagine these things as possibly happening to them, but inside a police state, they're not the normal target. There is a perceived sort of like zombie apocalypse kind of scenario where white people could suddenly turn into zombies, but zombies and other targets of violence within the state of exception normally represent those who are normally marginalized. And that's not to say that white people don't suffer abuse at the hand of the state. They absolutely do. But more often than not, they're privileged to the extent that they don't normally feel these things directly. Instead, they imagine them, which is what this song is about. Hallowed be thy name, where death is both holy, hallowed, a hallowed state of grace, where you fear death, but you're also embracing it at the end of your life. And you accept your fate, but also romanticize it through a song that you then turn around through the ghost of the counterfeit, this forgery, if you will. Gerald Hogel's theory is that the sovereignty of the West is built on a lie or a counterfeit. Specifically, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto is originally being presented as a historical document that would later go on to be proven false by the author when he announced a year later, in 1765, a year after he anonymously published that novella, oh, psych, it's not actually a historical document. But that idea of historical reinvention through the lens of an imaginary past is super Gothic. And furthermore, that's used to further the process of abjection, per Julia Kristeva, the creation of an alien state, an abnormal versus a normal, and in order to maintain a sense of normality relative to the imperial core, to white cishet men, that kind of thing, you have to imagine all of these things that terrify you. And that, in turn, is commodified, it's fetishized, it's romanticized, what have you, to make the usual benefactors of settler colonialism and patriarchal capitalism lots of money. And that's exactly what Iron Maiden did. And my point being is that during the state of crisis in Thatcher's England, Satanic Panic was something that didn't affect these guys to nearly the same extent that it would have gay men. So you have, I'm trying to think of his name now off the top of my head. Derek Jarman, where he did Caravaggio, but then he also did a movie, The Fall of England. No, that's not it. Well, anyway, the image here, The Fall of England, which was about a gay man growing up in Thatcher's England. So if you're white, cishet, and not a communist, or a pagan, or like a devil worshiper, what would be called unironically a devil worshiper, and this extends, of course, to homosexuality and various forms of gender nonconformity, which would have began to emerge in the late 70s and early 80s. So with 1979, you had the transsexual empire, and The Life of Brian, where they're making fun of the trans character for wanting to have babies, that kind of thing. These kinds of dialogues would have been starting to emerge. And at the same time, Julia Kristeva, writing about the process of abjection, that kind of theory, along with feminist theory from the time, Gothic theory from the time, in academia, they would have been talking about the kinds of things that Iron Maiden would have largely been shielded from. And it's not to say that there isn't a class character to their writing. I think originally, when they were kind of an up-and-coming band, and they hadn't really achieved the kind of success that they would upon doing this album. But even doing this album, as going from working class to stardom, the same way that Metallica might, or Megadeth might, or pretty much any white boy group that decides to make a metal band and give it their all, you have to keep in mind that, yeah, there's risk involved, but there's also a lot of privilege which enables them to do it. You see a lot of black metal bands or gay metal bands. Rob Halford didn't come out as gay until 1998 after he left Judas Priest. So my point being is that Satanic Panic, regardless if it's about actual devil worship or homosexuality or gender nonconformity, even though these kinds of dialogues were starting to emerge at this point, in academia, they were also emerging in metal, but they were largely being broached in mainstream circles by people like Iron Maiden, who, despite the fact that they were kind of up-and-coming working class dudes who were assimilating to a higher rung of class relative to their burgeoning stardom, they still were largely unaffected by the usual prejudices and taboos that they were discussing in their music in a very Gothic kind of way, a world of darkness and lightning and damnation. And so you have to keep all of that in mind when listening to this song, is that it's very much about self-persecution as an imagined state, a feeling of being executed as a white person. And you could also write that about white people being afraid of cops and police violence. It certainly affects them, just not to nearly the same systemic degree, because Britain and the United States are settler colonies, and they don't really involve a systemic wide persecution of these groups in nearly the same degree or flavor. More often than not, white men become police officers or soldiers that police or otherwise brutalize members of the underclass, which are generally people of color, religious minorities, gender nonconforming people, female dissidents who don't know their place, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of intersectionality, but the long and the short of it is that white men, generally speaking, when harm befalls them, it's that of the Gothic villain, where they're turned into a monster that attacks their fellow workers for the bourgeoisie to serve the profit motive, that kind of thing. And so all of this shit, see how it's bouncing around in my head and I'm able to just kind of rattle all this shit off? Well, it's because I'm effectively, my initial volume was my PhD. My second volume was about simplifying that in a way that was more lecturable. It was a practical way that you could explain in a more symposium-esque kind of style. And then we're segueing into monsters and various forms of capital punishment that exemplify through the undead, demons, and anthropomorphs, furries, chimeras, composite bodies, that kind of thing, man-made monsters. They're all man-made through Cartesian dualism to demonize nature, to serve profit, and to primarily benefit white European men. But yeah, so all of that kind of shit is just in my head right now. It's, if you had a filing cabinet, it would be open inside my head and all these different documents would be out in front of me. And so I can just access the information very quickly. That being said, having, spent the better part of probably 20 minutes now critiquing Iron Maiden, I still grew up listening to this, and there is a nostalgic component to the music. And honestly, if you take the aesthetics and power of heavy metal by itself, very similar to the aesthetics of death and power and torture and rape and various other things like that, that isn't intrinsically a bad thing. And you can reclaim that, the power of heavy metal, and have it be more class and cultural conscious towards the struggles of people who aren't white. So whereas Whitey in this song is like, woe is me, I'm being executed, but also it's kind of badass. It's holy. Hallowed be thy name. I think that's the Lord's Prayer, but from the Lord's Prayer. Maybe they used to say that to men who were being executed as well. I don't know the exact history behind the lyrics of this song and how they were written, but that would be my guess. That's my hot take. And the song itself is honestly quite good. There's a universal adaptability to music, what Slavoj Žižek would refer to as universal adaptability. So you can take the song and apply its anthemic qualities to things beyond white people, or white people who become allies to other victims of state abuse. And I'm a trans woman, for instance, and I listen to this song and I think, okay, can we think about this in a way that's relative to the struggles of people who normally face police violence, who are normally found guilty and hung by the state for doing sex work, buggery, for what would be called buggery in terms of homosexual men. If you go back to the 18th century, they didn't really have the language to describe gender nonconforming acts. Per Foucault and the ancient canonical codes in the history of sexuality, he describes that sexuality up until that point in about the mid 18th century, sexuality was an action, not an identity. But that began to change with the development of a Gothic mode of discussion that allowed for the rise of, with the middle class, a rise of cultural identity that was sort of struggling against the shackles of capitalism, because capitalism does alienate and fetishize, but also turn people against each other to serve profit. And with Matthew Lewis, he wrote about the struggles of queer men. Predominantly, if you read The Monk, there's a lot of very gay shit happening in that, including shape-shifting and cross-dressing, sex, and black magic. So this is nothing new. By the time Iron Maiden did this, this was already nearly 2 centuries old at this point. And but they're commodifying it in a way that's more unique to the 20th century onwards. I mean, to be fair, that same kind of commodification was happening with Anne Radcliffe to make money, because Radcliffe wrote The Mysteries of Udolpho and her other novels largely from a position of anonymity, and then she promptly fucked off with her fuck you money and kept quiet, whereas Matthew Lewis was much more of a public figure. He was a member of Parliament, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge had a shit fit about it, we stare and tremble, because someone with a position of privilege decided to use that privilege to write a genderqueer, campy, gothic novel that's critiquing the current status of things using gothic language. So going back to the imaginary past to say something about the present in a way that critiques the status quo, that holds it accountable. Whereas Iron Maiden doesn't really do that to the same extent. But we can still listen to this music and enjoy it and think about it critically in a way where something like this could be anthemic of a rising class consciousness. I could do a video where I use this as like a theme song, or I do like a reinvention of it. You know, I play the music myself or something. And then suddenly you have the song being used to describe my struggles under capital and not Bruce Dickinson and company. But yeah, I don't think there's really a lot to say about the song itself. Like, I could put it on, but you know the song already. I've listened to this song thousands of times at this point. I guess, fuck it. You know, I could listen to it and sort of listen to at least the opening, and we'll go from there and see if I feel like listening to the whole thing, because partly I'm kind of busy, so I don't necessarily have time to go through the whole song and talk about something that a million other people have talked about in more like simple kind of ways, like, wow, this song rocks out. No shit, you don't say. But yeah, so let's give it a gander here, and I'll stop every so often and say something about it, I guess. Okay, so right off the bat, you have a sort of a little melodic refrain. Da, 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 da. That repeats over and over throughout the entire song. And it starts off kind of quiet, that little melody does, but then you have the ringing of the bell, the gong, very similar to Hell's Bells by AC/DC, or For Whom the Bell Tolls. And then this song where you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You know, it's like a whole note, you know, for an entire bar or measure. And then so there's some loud elements that are kind of announcing, like, the song is beginning on the summoning of the damned man to be executed. I'm waiting in my cold cell. It's also very common in songs like this for the voice of the dead. This is a dead person talking about their own death, in a song, in a letter, on a tombstone. Very Gothic. When the bell begins to chime, reflecting on my past life, and it doesn't have much time. So there, the feeling of disintegration, the feeling of one being dead, executed within a liminal state of crisis, which is manufactured by the bourgeoisie. People are left in a constant state of panic, a constant state of moral panic, to be specific, wherein deliberately unstable socio-material conditions lead them to feel like they're about to die at any moment. It's called alarm fatigue. But this kind of thing, this state of emergency, is expressed in Gothic language in a way that helps them alleviate some of that stress by kind of embracing that fact. And you see the problem with that from a commercial standpoint is it can kind of just turn into its own thing, like Iron Maiden merchandise, for instance, as opposed to really trying to end the curse, as it were. 'Cause at 5 o'clock they take me
to the gallows pole. The sands of time.
This is also when Bruce Dickinson could actually sing. One problem with their later albums is he kind of loses that vibrato, that ability to hold high notes, and this is hands down the best example of him being able to do that, kind of showing off at the end of the album, really.
For me, are running low.
Okay, cool part. This is where you had that. Okay, so here it goes low, and it goes down, 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 and then it rises. So there's this sense of diminishing, but then sort of a holy feeling of jouissance, right? In the face of one's numinous deconstruction, faced with the Almighty, the Divine, you are simultaneously reduced to nothing, and at the same time you become one with everything. Here we have the refrain again. You have that refrain again, and you are now it's much louder. So in the idea, like imagine Beethoven, right, where things are like really, really, really quiet, and then dun 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 dun, like you have these refrains, these codas, like Beethoven's Fifth, where it would be like in his case. Oftentimes he would start out quite loud, but then he would get quiet again and then loud again. And in here, the musical refrain, the leitmotif, starts off kind of, relatively speaking, delicate, and now it's repeating in a way that's much louder. Also, incidentally, I just want to say that I think it was Clive Burr was the drummer on this album before they replaced him with Nico McBrain. I think Clive Burr is a much better drummer. One, I believe he actually uses the double kick, whereas Nico doesn't for whatever reason. A very good drummer. This song has very, I don't know, it's got that disco beat kind of thing going on, but there's almost this call and response between the drummer and everyone else, where he's not just holding the beat, but he's doing it in a way that's kind of grooving and rhythmic, and the various members of the band can kind of work off each other. And then there's that, it gets bam, quiet, and then this.
Look to the bars of the last sites of a world that has gone very wrong for me. Can it be that there's some sort of error not to stop the surmounting terror? Is it really the end, not some crazy dream? Somebody please tell me that I'm dreaming. It's not easy to stop from.
Then you have that just that the kind of chugging guitar riff, dun 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 dun. And again, 1 2 3 1 2 3, just whole steps, one whole step, two whole step, bum 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 bum, and it's very, very simple but very heavy. And the reason it works as well as it does is because there's a lot of like really nice use of dynamics and things like that throughout the song. So yeah, the idea that you're facing your demise, and you know the initial fear of death is sort of overcome with the fact that one lives on in a hallowed state that people remember. And if you honestly, I think the popularity of this song and its enduring nature over time kind of speaks to that. This is probably the most listened to Iron Maiden song of all time, if I just had to guess. I'm sure there are plenty of other songs that are just as good. Take your pick off their first 5 albums. and anything from Ghost covering Transylvania, or I'm sorry, Phantom of the Opera, to Aces High, or Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, Power Slave. There's just so many good songs. I always liked Heaven Can Wait off their fourth album, whose name is eluding me. Somewhere in Time. Yeah. And so lots of immortal famous songs, but this song in particular, where the person is like, I don't want to believe there's ever an end. When we die, forgetting existential crises in the face of whether or not there's an afterlife, our memory lives on through these kinds of Gothic memento mori, which is what this song is. It's about someone who's dying or about to die, and we're effectively looking into their life, listening to their final recording, looking at their last photograph, and kind of being like, ooh, exciting. And there's a sense of being able to meet our own feelings of mid-crisis, mid-death, by looking at theirs to console ourselves with. Basically calculated risk, a BDSM kind of exercise where you feel disempowered, so you put yourself in a death scenario to make yourself feel more in control. And I guess I could listen to the rest of the song, but I don't know. It's kind of repetitive at this point, just in the sense that you have the verses and the choruses and the solo, and you hear yeah, hallowed be thy name at the very end of the song. Is kind of a triumphant, defiant resistance of death, or be like, fuck you, death, I'm going to live on, even though I'm dead. This is my immortality, which is fitting, but also just keep in mind these kinds of privileges. The neo-Gothic mode, as it arose during the 18th century onwards, was predominantly white and cishet. But it was also curiously penned by a woman, Anne Radcliffe and her School of Terror, versus Matthew Lewis's School of Horror, a gay man. So a woman and a gay man kind of really helped popularize the Gothic as something that was kind of created many, many more times after that in future forms. Horace Walpole, arguably gay, what you call a confirmed bachelor, lived into his 70s. He was also the son of the first British Prime Minister, and was obviously very privileged, but he was doing it in ways that kind of allowed for people to speak to taboo things through Gothic theater as a style that he kind of came up with that was sort of hauntological. From Derrida's Spectres of Marx, 1993, where they are trapped between the past and the present in this imaginary kind of form that is neither here nor there, but somewhere in between. And while Radcliffe was commodifying the Gothic in ways that allowed for white people to make money, including white women, which would rear its ugly head in the 20th and 21st centuries with J.K. Rowling and other TERFs before and after Rowling's initial success, are people who are imitating her to serve the profit motive, again, through the Ghost of the Counterfeit and the process of abjection. You also have a queer component, which notably is lacking in Iron Maiden's song. These are my thoughts about Hallowed Be Thy Name relative to my own research, mind you. I could listen to the whole song. It's kind of difficult for me to do that at the moment because, again, I'm still in the midst of writing and illustrating my books. But that being said, if you like this kind of thing, and if you want me to do something simpler, let me know, because I can do that. It's just, I don't know. There's so much metal that I listen to beyond just the obvious examples from the 70s and 80s. If I had to pick one band that was my favorite, it'd be Judas Priest, especially from the 70s. So Les Binks, Judas Priest, basically, with Stained Class in particular, but also Unleashed in the East and Hellbent for Leather. Les Binks was a really good drummer, and just the music they wrote was very critical in a way that Iron Maiden, generally speaking, is not. It's more comic booky, I think. And that's kind of a problem where it became insubstantial, but it wasn't always. It lost that critical sort of punkish voice, and it focused more on just monsters as like a popcorn commodity thing that became increasingly critically vacuous during the 1980s through Thatcher, and on the American side of things, Ronald Reagan. So definitely something to keep in mind. I could definitely listen to some metal that I really like, but it's going to be much more obscure. So think new wave of traditional heavy metal and new wave of thrash heavy metal. So you're talking albums strictly from like 2014 onwards that not very many people have heard of, but honestly, I've listened to quite a bit as I'm working on my book volumes and what have you. So yeah, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it, let me know. Let me know what you want me to analyze so I can talk about different things. So if people really want me to talk about a particular metal album or a particular metal song, whether it's famous or obscure, just let me know. And otherwise, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for tuning in, and see you later.